Neapykantos nusikaltimų problema paliečia ne tik Lietuvos visuomenę, su to kovoja.
Hate crimes are the problem that is relevant not only for Lithuania, but for the entire world. Therefore, we should look at the best practices not only in Lithuania, but also across the world. There are special platforms to address hate crimes. There are special police units that are in place. We also have to look at the cooperation of various NGOs and so on. During this part, we will hear about the measures that are applied by Ireland and Sweden. We will try to answer to find out whether some initiatives could be applied here in Lithuania and whether the situation with regard to the hate speech and hate crime changes. Today we're going to have 5 panelists. I will soon introduce them. First and foremost, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Göran Stanton, an inspector of hate crimes division within the Stockholm Police, founder of the Swedish LGBT Police Association. Also, we have Shane O'Curry, who is a community development and human rights worker who has developed community-based hate crime monitoring since 1998. We also have Agnė Greblikaitė, who is the head of the Community Officers Activity Division of Kaunas County Police Headquarters. And we are happy to have with us Goda Jurevičiūtė, project manager at the Human Rights Monitoring Institute. Before we start the debate, let me introduce to you some technical aspects. Since we have foreign guests, the debate will be interpreted from English into Lithuanian and from Lithuanian into the English language. So if you want to choose the language, you have to find the interpretation icon and press whichever caption is necessary for you either. We also have interpretation into the Lithuanian Sign Language. The discussion is broadcast live. You will also be able to have the recording of this debate on the website of the forum. If you want to give a question to one of the panelists or to, let's say, say some remark, you can put the question down in the Q&A part. So I will read your question to the listeners and they will try to answer the question. During the entire debate, there will be a kind of a contest, as at the very end of the discussion, I will give a question, and the first to answer the question correctly will receive a prize. So first we will start this discussion with a presentation, and I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Göran Stanton on hate crime unit in Stockholm. Mr. Stanton.
Okay. Since 2007, Stockholm have a hate crime unit. And why did we start a hate crime unit? Yes, it was the Gay Police Association had an International Gay Police Association. After that, the chief inspector, Mrs. Karin Jöklad, took an initiative to start a project, hate crime project. And it was very successful. This was 2007. And until 2015, it was only in Stockholm we had this hate crime unit. Why did we start it? We should see here why it's not working. We want to increase the will to report hate crimes, because in many groups, like the gay LGBT groups, the Afro-Swedish group, the Roma group, the Muslim group, didn't have so much trust in the police. So we thought we have to give them more trust in police, so they could report, because many of them didn't report that it was victim of hate crimes. We also want to increase the acknowledgement in the police force to discover, investigate and prosecute hate crimes, develop work methods. Also increase the credibility in the police within minority groups, and monitor follow-up contact for the police officer community. And we take the next. And we don't have anything in the penal code whose hate crime is aggravating circumstances. In 1994, they put it in the penal code, this as aggravating circumstance for judgment and sentence if one of the motive for the crime is to violate a person because of ethnicity, race, skin color, religious beliefs, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. It should be aggravating circumstances. And investigations focus on the investigations. But from the beginning, 2007, 2015, it was only in Stockholm we had special investigators who investigate the hate crimes. But since 2015, they decided that all the three big cities, Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö, should have hate crime units. And in Sweden, we have now 7 regions. And the 4 regions who don't have a hate crimes unit, they should have appointed investigator who investigate the hate crimes. Also, internal education feedback. We have to give them what we need, so we should success in the investigation, so we could prosecute this and we could go to court and win in the court also. And also external lecture information to other groups we cooperated with. And here we can say 2018, we have this crime prevention council who take hate crime reports. They did it every year, but since 2016 it's only every second year. This is the last now we have is coming in for I think a week ago, and you can see that mostly of the hate crime is xenophobic, racial, 69%, 11% is homophobic, and you can see Islamophobic 8%, Christophobic and other anti-religious 8%, 4% is anti-Semitic, and 1% is transphobic crimes. And you can also see which crime it is. Mostly unlawful threats, molestations, 39%, damage, clutter, 16%, hate speech, 16%, who have increased a lot since a few years back, because lots of this hate speech is on social medias like Facebook, Twitter, Google. Violent crime is 11%. Then we have unlawful discrimination 1%, defamations 1%, 12%, and other crime who is not in these crimes is about 4%. Why do they not report hate crimes? Because like in the Muslim group, about 90% who is a victim of hate crime don't report it to the police. So why do they report it? They don't define the event as a hate or as a crime. They are normalized of the situation that it is like this. And some people feel shame, don't want to acknowledge vulnerability. Also, some maybe the neighbor do this to you, you are afraid of the neighbor. and you get reprisals from the perpetrator. That's why you don't report it. Fear of secondary victimizations, that the police shouldn't believe you. The police think that it's not so serious crime, and for all victims, all crime is very serious. And many say, we have reported before, and you put it down before we left the police station. Why should we report it again? Because we don't have any witness, we don't have any other who can prove that the crime. And if you're not open with your sexual orientation, maybe you live with very religious parents, family, if they found out that you are LGBT, then it could be very dangerous for you. And if you are not illegal refugee, then you also can't report it, because then the police would send you out. And what is successful in Sweden? The government prioritized hate crime, homophobic, between 2000 and 2007, and from we had a new government 2014. Role of increase 70 punishment 94. Before we didn't have this punishment, aggravating circumstances for hate crimes. Dedicated persons in the national, like our RFSL is our LGBT group, and in the police. Dedicated, engaged chief commissioner in police, joined conferences for the police at these gay organizations, Stockholm Pride, the Swedish Gay Police Association, cooperation with Jewish, Muslim, Afro-Swedish and religious group. And then we also have what is not so good. What could happen? Swedish government didn't prioritize hate crimes since 2007, 2014. We can have another government and they say it's not so important for these issues anymore. Then they can change. It's small units, and if some hard to find people who want to work, and if we are allowed to have bigger units, few dedicated persons, no national policy education definitions, organizationally placed under a crime investigations, like we have lots of murders and everything, and we have to help other groups with the investigations, so our investigation have to wait until we have time. Dedicated chiefs commissioner ends. That's a little bit about the Swedish. But then I think you want to also ask some questions later, so I give the words to my Irish colleague.
Gerai, labai ačiū, ponė Stantonai, tikrai įdomi prezentacija, vėliau galbūt...
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. Maybe later on we will talk a bit more about that. Now, I would be very happy to give the floor to your colleague, as you have said, Shane O'Curry, Director of the Irish Network Against Racism. He is going to speak about racist incidents.
I'm Shane O'Curry. I'm the director of INR, the Irish Network Against Racism. I'll try and get through this as quickly as I can to give us time for a discussion. And so I'm going to talk. So excuse me, so the presentation outlines the work of INR, which is a civil society organization, and I suppose the iReport.ie racist incident reporting system is a civil society racist incident reporting system. So its conceptualization and the way it works is in the context of a civil society, of the needs of civil society. So I'm going to talk about how we have made it into an effective tool, both for data collection, but also as an advocacy tool and for contributing to the conversation about racism, racist discrimination, hate crime, and hate crime more broadly against all targeted groups. I'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've had in establishing it and our work using strategic alliances and partnerships and our civil society network to overcome that. And I'll share some of our headline findings and achievements and some speculation about where we might go in the future. We are a network organization. We have 225 or 125 member organizations today. And they include every type of ethnic minority, including Jewish groups, traveler and Roma groups, Muslim groups, people of African descent, etc., and also the biggest trade unions and other civil society organizations, any organization which will have significant minority ethnic membership. And we work with our network members. We work in a strategic partnership with an academic who helps us with our analysis, and we use the iReport system, and we also do campaigning and mobilizing. So I suppose an important thing is our analysis is that we understand racism as operating not just at the level of hate incidents and hate crimes, but that these give us insight into structural and institutional dimensions of racism. And we believe that an analysis of racism and hate crime requires this context of broader policy and practice frameworks, media discourse, and utterances by public figures to understand it. We have a victim-centered approach, so this means that the analysis of racism and hate crime must include an analysis of the impacts of all incidents, as well as the institutional responses to racist incidents, and that these are in practice inseparable, the impact on the victim and the institutional response. So it's important to get information on that. And so that's something that I would like to stress. So what is the need for iReport.ie? So the first year since we launched in 2013, we had the first year that we had a full year's data was 2014, and in that year we recorded 350. We took 350 reports, which included multiple incidents. Within that, we estimated 122 racist incidents that would meet the hate crime criteria, whereas the police in that year recorded just 43. I think some of the problems are very similar to the problems that Göran just outlined for the Swedish police, in that there was no national understanding of hate crime. There was no working definition within the police. And a lot of systems were not in place within the police for investigating, following up, and recording hate crime. And you can see that in the years preceding 2014, you can see a decay in police figures, such that police figures, such that the Central Statistics Office in Ireland in 2017 decided that police figures were not reliable enough to publish. And so we're now in that situation. Now this year things are beginning to change, and they're changing in a very promising way, and they promise to change very radically as new systems have been brought in place by the Irish police. But I'll tell you a little more about that later. So the rationale for iReport.ie is the need to overcome this problem of widespread underreporting, which leads to a silence on racism, as we call it. and on what is called racism, and which leads to a racism denial in our institutions, in our policymakers, in public discourse, etc., such that minority ethnic experiences of racism and discrimination go unrecognized, so that minority ethnic people are in a way re-victimized by this non-recognition, and so we have two radically different experiences of the same society depending on what your identity is. So that was the need. It was the need to speak into the silence and to break that silence on racism. And so we established iReport.ie in 2013, and the idea was that it should be, I very honestly say that it's an independent system owned by civil society, that there would be a collective and coordinated approach among civil society actors, so that it's conducive to a coalition forming among NGOs, that we should produce data that is comparable and credible for reporting. In other words, data that would allow us to hold the state to account, and that is collected in such a way that gives it credibility. Most importantly, from our point of view, is that people's voices should be used, and people tell their stories in their own voice and be believed. The system also gives a role to allies from the majority community to show solidarity. And we hope that this would bring about a cultural shift in Irish institutions, including in Irish institutions and in wider society. And we believe that we've been somewhat successful in these aims. And of course, and that cultural shift means making recording and responding to racism a normal thing. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that, as well as changing laws. So we set up the iReport system to follow those criteria. It's non-state, it's independent, it's confidential, and those are to overcome the lack of trust that minorities have in official systems. It can be anonymous if somebody wants to report anonymously. It is both non-verified and verified, and I'll explain that. It's non-verified in the sense that this is not a criminal law system. This is not a system for collecting information on a crime for the purposes of a criminal investigation. And that means that it can be anonymous. But at the same time, the data is verified. Our methodology is robust, it's transparent, and we have an independent academic who verifies the data and publishes findings from the data in peer-reviewed journals. And that allows us to overcome the problem of verification of the data, or of legitimacy rather, as well. And we strive to achieve international norms. So that is, we're in the conversation permanently with our partners across Europe. And so, for example, we are able to produce data on hate crime that is compatible with ODIHR's annual hate crime reporting norms. So who can report? So it's, again, this is more about it, but this is to say that it is it has a user-friendly interface, and we are constantly improving on this, improving on the questionnaire, the platform, the language, and the supporting resources around it. In fact, we're under a review right now, and there will be a next version of the iReport system on January 1st. So how does it work? Well, you can go to iReport.ie, and I encourage you to go to www.ireport.ie and click on Report Incident. And I encourage you to do that. You can come out without clicking Submit, so you won't cause us any damage. Or you can fill out a questionnaire, and I'll just ask you to write the word test in big letters in the narrative so that we know it's a test, and we will delete it back out. But you can have a look around in there, and I would encourage you to do that. So how does the back end work? In practical terms, you can find it at iReport.ie. We use a WordPress plugin called Formidable Pro. It costs about $200. It cost $50 to begin with, but I understand now that it costs about $200 per year because they just added a cost to it. So that, and then plus your cost of hosting and domain, so that's a couple of $100 more. It's a WordPress plugin, and it gives you data in Excel compatible data sheets. So that's where you get it. I suppose the important thing to say is that those are your bare costs. So for less than $1,000 or euro a year, or in fact about 500, you can run this. But your real costs are in the management of the system, the coordination, the cost we have of pushing it and promoting it through our network. There's the admin and IT support, of course, and then there's all the media and social media support that we do, and the data analysis support, which add substantially to the cost. And I have to say that the system doesn't work if you don't communicate about it and promote it. So how does it work in society? So anybody can report any type of discriminatory incident, including a hate crime, and anybody who witnesses it, or anybody who's supporting someone who has experienced it can report it. So you can report it online. We also have Google and Android, or Apple and Android apps available at the App Store and Google Store, and so you can download those. So you make your report, and every quarter we crunch our data, and we make annual reports and also thematic reports. And then we submit those to intergovernmental organizations, the Irish government, the police, and other national authorities and policymakers, the media and the public, to the rest of civil society, and also to inform community action at a local level. And here is an example of the type of data that we produce. So this is our 2019 data. You can see that we got a total of 530 reports, and these can be divided into illegal discrimination, hate speech, and crimes. And there's a breakdown of the type of hate crime that people have experienced. I suppose it's important to note that we also take reports of discriminatory incidents that are that what might be called subcriminal or non-crime hate incidents, and this is because it is. I'm sure Professor Paul Igansky already said this. This is good practice among police forces, and it's also useful for us. It's also it makes it easier for us to encourage people to report to us. The most important thing, I think, also to say is that we monitor institutional responses to hate crime as well, or to hate crime and discriminatory incidents. In other words, we don't just ask people what happened. We ask them, how did the police follow up and investigate? And that has given us very, very important information that we have been able to use time and again in our submissions to the police, to the policing authorities, to government, to really get the police to improve practice around hate crime. And just to say that if you look at the top there, at this URL, you can find you can find all the reports going back to 2013. And so I'll just talk a little bit about our achievements. So we've recorded close to 3,000 incidents in the last 7 years.
Per pastaruosius 7
reports on racism over 7 years, which we've shared with all decision makers, as well as the media, as well as making reports to the policing authority, special commissions, to ODIHR, to ECRI, to the UN, etc. We have strengthened the civil society network in Ireland through this. We have collaborative engagement with civil society organizations and intergovernmental organizations and national authorities across Europe on this question of converging reporting standards. In other words, so that we can compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges. And over this time, we have seen a shift in the conversation with our national authorities in Ireland, with the Department of Justice, with the Policing Authority, and with An Garda Síochána, the Irish Police, such that today we have a very firm and loud commitment from all these authorities to improving hate crime policy and practice. We've seen real progress on hate crime legislation. We're expecting very good, very strong hate crime legislation next year. And we've seen significant progress on hate crime practice across a range of areas. And this speaks to Göran's point, including there is now a working definition of hate crime within the police. There is a compulsory H for hate crime elements tag on the police data system now. The police are bringing in a third-party reporting tool, reporting convention with outside agencies, and there will soon be a police online hate crime reporting system as well to run in parallel with this. So those are our major achievements, and we're very proud of those. Where do we think we're going to go in the future? Well, as I've said already, there will be improvements to the iReport.ie system in 2021. These will include improvements on the front end. So we'll have a simplified and streamlined questionnaire down from 39 questions to 17, with questions in simplified language. And the back end, which is really the end for two things, for producing reports, but also for case management and sharing with civil society organizations, which we hope in the years to come we will be able to improve. And all of this last phase is really thanks to a collaborative partnership that we have with the Facts Against Hate project, which is coordinated by the Human Rights section of the Finnish Ministry of Justice, where the civil society partners, who are the Center for Peace Studies in Zagreb and the Anti-Racism Forum in Finland, and ourselves have been engaged in a conversation with ODIHR about ODIHR's model hate crime reporting platform, which has really stimulated us to thinking about our own platform and how we can take good learnings from our platform and from the ODIHR platform to make a really good platform that would conform to international standards and be something that we could roll out to civil society organizations across the world going forward. So I'm going to leave it at that and let you ask me questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
I would like to ask you the following thing. In the previous sessions, we talked a lot about the problem, that is the attitude of the law enforcement authorities and courts towards the treatment of hate crimes. Could you please share your experience regarding this in Ireland and in Sweden? So could you please, Mr. O'Curry, speak about the situation in Ireland?
Yes, I will, of course. And firstly, it's the first term. It's the first time I've heard my name in Lithuanian, and it's lovely to hear. But I'll just say that yes, there is I imagine that there is a problem with the police, with what is referred to as police culture, which is unfortunately police culture is very often homophobic, misogynistic, and racist. There are elements of this type of culture in what's called the canteen culture inside the police, and this is reflected in the responses of police officers to minorities who report a hate crime to them. They tend to not be believed. There is a tendency to treat them as the criminal. There is a tendency to minimize or diminish their experience, or there is an inappropriate response in that the police doesn't even know the correct procedure themselves, and doesn't recognize that a pattern of harassment is actually a crime. And all of these things have been reported to us, and I suppose then that's why it's very important that the iReport system captures data on that, on police responses, because we're able to furnish the Department of Justice, the policing authority, which is the body that oversees the police, and the police themselves, with hard data on people's direct experiences of police responses. And that has allowed us to bring the conversation into improvements in those areas.
Jūs jau minėjote, kad platformoje iš tiesų nemažai gauna.
You have already mentioned that you receive a lot of notices on your platform, but how much the Irish society is conscientious and how much it understands what is hate crime, hate speech? Because in Lithuania, we have problems regarding understanding this.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that 7 years ago, we were in a similar place to where it sounds like you are in Lithuania. It was hard for us to be heard, but I think over time, from repeating ourselves, from producing data that was consistent with the previous data, we built up our credibility. We built up ourselves as a go-to authority for the media on questions of racism and hate crime. We were able to strategically use our data to speak to our international obligations, so that we were able to give data to ECRI, data to the Fundamental Rights Agency, data to ODIHR, and data to the governments to say, look, you're not fulfilling your obligations about hate crime. And at the same time, we have the same conversation in the media. And I think over time, from repeating ourselves and from referring to our fresh data all the time, and using good media and social media strategies, and asking our network of civil society organizations to push our messaging, we have brought about a shift in understanding in the broader political culture, so that racism denial isn't really as much of a thing today as it was before. And of course, when the Black Lives Matter moment happened, it was as if the ground was ready for a new consciousness to take hold. And I think we've seen a real shift in the last 6 months in Ireland. But I think that a lot of that was because of the work that we did, repeating ourselves.
And now let's move on. Let's go back to Lithuania. Ms. Jurevičiūtė, I have a question for you. We've heard that the hate crimes are fought all over the world. How do you see Lithuania in this context? First and foremost, I would like to thank all the participants and panelists. I am going to learn myself and use some of the ideas in Lithuania. How does Lithuania look like in the world when addressing hate crimes? It depends who we are going to compare ourselves with and what attitude we are going to employ. We don't know the scope of the problem in Lithuania. Today, we have spoken about the problem of latency, and we know that communities sometimes decide not to report the hate crimes, and even when they are reported, For example, about the incitement to hatred online, the police officials decide not to start the pre-trial investigation. Speaking of crimes of violence, when the police starts investigation, the criterion of hate is quite often omitted. Of course, we can criticize ourselves a lot, but since the subject of this panel is good practice, I'd like to say that during the last few years, we have achieved substantial progress. As for collection of statistics, the representatives of the prosecutors have spoken today that the way of working regarding statistical information collection is going to be changed. When they have a suspicion that it might be a hate crime, they will see questions, the list that would help them decide whether it is hate crime. The representative of the OEC has also spoken about this today. Recently, there were a lot of training sessions for police officials. And I think that Mr. Velička will have the opportunity to talk about this. We had a distance learning course for police officials. Prosecutors, police officials, Ms. Agnė Greblikaitė and Mr. Vilius Velička were involved in this work, as well as the current chairman of the Parliament's Committee on Human Rights. And when I talked about this project in Estonia, they were very interested in this initiative. And it might be taken up by Estonia. Speaking of the Baltic states, we had a few projects with partners from Latvia and Estonia. And in most cases, Lithuania looks quite good in this context. There were institutional efforts made to change the response towards hate crimes, and latency happens when communities fail to report about crimes due to different reasons, sometimes mistrust. And Göran has mentioned a number of things to the subject. Agnė Greblikaitė may not agree with this because she's representing communities, society, but allow me to mention one practice that was both positive and negative. At the beginning of this year, we had roundtable discussions initiated by the Ministry of Interior. The Human Rights Monitoring Institute has participated in these roundtable discussions. Police officials and prosecutors were invited, as well as members from the vulnerable communities, such as communities of Roma, communities of Jewish people, as well as LGBT communities. This was a positive practice because many countries arrange such meetings, intersectorial meetings. And we talked about the difference between discrimination and hate crimes. We have learned more about the criminal process. and it made it easier to understand why it is sometimes hard to prove that it was a hate crime and what information is needed for being able to prove this. This initiative was very positive according to the communities. However, no continuation of this activity is foreseen. And those who organized this meeting, these roundtable discussions, they divided them up in two parts. In the first part, we met the law enforcement officials and we talked about communities that encounter hate crimes, and we tried to learn about the negative opinions. We were not surprised to learn these things. Police represents general society, and we have learned about different points of view regarding Muslim people, Jewish people, Roma people, as well as LGBT. So it was clear that a lot of work still has to be done in order to fight against these prejudices. Police officials kept repeating that this hadn't influenced their work. However, we see from the case of Veličkas against Lithuania how pretrial investigations are conducted. During the meetings, we used to stress that now you are welcome to express your points of view, but later on in your work, we would encourage you to keep these opinions to yourselves. And at certain point, I stopped interpreting into English for a guest that happened to be of color in order to avoid insulting him. Today, when I was listening to the Deputy Commissioner, Mr. Paulauskas, he said that police officials have to be educated, not only taught how to understand whether it is a hate crime, and this is very important in order to go forward. Thank you, Goda. Mr. Velička, Ms. Jurevičiūtė has spoken about the training to police officials, that she has heard the things that she hasn't quite expected or didn't want to hear. Police is not an exceptional part of society. It is the reflection of the general society. But I would like to ask, how do you see the situation as an insider? Well, to my personal opinion, the situation is not that bad. It is improving. We have excellent opportunities. And now Lithuania's police school is participating in the project together with the Human Rights Fund experts and other international organizations. We develop the training program for officials, as well as we have methodology being developed based on which the officials are being trained. Goda has mentioned e-trainings. The police officials, prosecutors' office, different experts assisted in developing the training material. So I see a lot of willingness to get involved in addressing these problems, and I would like to say that we will achieve better results. And what are the main problems that you would like to mention? What are the problems that have to be addressed through training or in other ways? The problems are general. It's the attitude towards vulnerable groups, and this influences police officials as well. Probably it is hard to compare the situation, but when the piece of legislation was adopted in 2011 on domestic violence, we have witnessed a huge progress in this area. So the same could be said about hate crimes. We have to discuss it, educate society, and as for the officials, as Goda has mentioned, the education is as important as training. We work hand in hand, and it is important for us not only to see the problems, but also have intersectorial meetings with organizations that fight for human rights. We have to sit down and talk about this. We have to find areas to improve, and this will only help the situation.
You have mentioned that the trainings are underway, so I wonder what kind of officers are taking part in the trainings and what projects are you engaged in? So, and what exactly are they being taught and educated? First and foremost, both during the previous program as well as now, police officers are engaged in the training of hate crimes. The same is being done this year. Officers are being trained to identify hate crimes, how to respond to them, how to behave once one faces with the hate crimes, how to communicate with the victims of hate crimes. We also provide such trainings for students at the police school. When it comes to policemen who are already working, we provide upgrading training courses for upgrading their qualifications. The program has been approved by the Prosecutor General. We also have the program for distant learning. During this distant learning, quite a number of officers will be able to take part, and we will have various experts to cover different topics, and I believe that they will get a lot of knowledge. They will engage in various practical tasks. Ms. Greblikaitė, as Goda mentioned, you might want to talk about the relations of community with the police, but well, you are the head of the Community Officers Activity Division of Kaunas County Police Headquarters. So what do you think about the cooperation? Well, indeed, just like Goda mentioned, I participated in this roundtable discussion previously, and I was surprised, positively surprised, that the Jewish community, Roma community members recognized us. They knew us. They knew who we were. Well, there are problems, I cannot deny this, but I can say that these are very serious problems. But I am talking only about Kaunas city and Kaunas county. We do work a lot. The Communities Office Division has been set up 7 years ago, so we try to maintain contacts with our community members. We maintain contacts with the Jewish community. It is one of the longest living communities in Lithuania. Well, definitely, communities did not trust police officers previously, but now I am very happy that the contacts are very good and there is trust between us. And I don't think that I will surprise Goda by saying that. We do our utmost to make our communities safe. Indeed, when it comes to various communities, including the Roma community or other communities, so such communities do not always trust police officers, and previously you said it was a very often case. Previously it was often the case. The key function of our unit is to visit community, to ask them how can we help them, to provide any information on various aspects of their life. For example, to provide them with the rules on the public order, to show them the contacts if, let's say, they have certain problems, and many other aspects that they should draw attention to. We always highlight that they should not be afraid of us because we are not their enemies. What are the tendencies when it comes to hate crimes and hate speech in these communities? Have you heard of their expectations, or have you heard of any complaints that they have? Communities would be willing to feel safe in their environment. They always want us to be somewhere near. Today, we have a very close contact both with the Muslim community and the Jewish community in our county. We also have the calendar of festive events so that we could know what each community is celebrating. Then, if we know that there is a certain celebration, we bring even more police officers to show the community that they can feel safe, because this was their expectation, to see more of the police in their community. Well, we've heard a lot about prejudices that are very alive within various public authorities. Do you take any measures to combat that? I am very happy that the people I am the manager of is a very tolerant one. The people are not against any races or people of other beliefs. Such people have traveled a lot, they have seen the world, they have broad attitudes, and I know that sometimes there are people still have their prejudices because they have been entrenched in their consciousness from their childhood. But whenever someone comes to work for the police, we always tell them that whatever prejudices you have to leave behind the doors, because this will be for the benefit of the entire community. Ms. Jurevičiūtė, I still want to ask one question about the projects that you have been implementing in Lithuania. Maybe we don't know much about them, but which are the projects that you think are most important ones? Well, first, I'd like to speak about the roundtable discussions. Well, I agree with Agnė, and I said that quite many good solutions were taken with regard to the institutional response. But during the debate, I did face with a negative approach of people. But in general, I believe that organization of roundtable discussions was a positive thing. Well, when it comes to the implemented projects or initiatives, which would you be more interested to hear about? Well, the most important ones, the most significant ones, because I don't think that all the things could be applied, let's say, in Lithuania.
Teigiamų praktikų gal galima paminėti, tai čia jau Vilius išvardino visų pirma mokymus, taip pat aš tą nuotolinį kursą labai norėčiau paminėti dėl to.
I would like to mention the remote training courses that were held on the initiative of the Ministry of the Interior. These trainings were given to police officers, to judicial officers, to students studying at the police school. Majority of those students have already become policemen. But the problem with the courses is that they are not continuous, which means that there is no follow-up. It's okay as long as, let's say, legislative provisions are not amended. But once the situation changes, well, we should introduce them to the law enforcement authorities. I'm not sure whether you would be interested in all the good practices, but I'd like to mention the working group under the Ministry of the Interior. This working group has engaged non-governmental organizations, representatives from the most vulnerable social groups, police officers, representatives of the prosecutor's office. This working group holds regular discussions. They are very interesting.
Pasisakymai tarsi lieka tokioje pilkojoje zonoje, kad mes negalime už juos nubausti, bet kita vertus mes turbūt ir negalime jų toleruoti.
It was already said today that sometimes hate speeches cannot be punished, but during the debates of this working group, people are trying to come up with solutions what to do in such cases. There is a need for more victimological research on the part of institutions to make sure whether legal provisions respond to the experience of victims of hate crimes. Because the state has to plan its response to such hate crimes. Again, when it comes to the roundtable discussions, I remember one case from the United Kingdom I talked about it with the Crown Prosecutor's Office representative. The United Kingdom
nukentėjęs asmuo ir įvardina, kad tai yra neapykantos nusikaltimas, arba jeigu tai kyla tokių įtarimų.
In the United Kingdom, if a person reports that the crime is a hate crime, it is registered as a hate crime, whereas in Lithuania, we include a crime into the category of hate crimes only when an pre-trial investigation is launched. So maybe we could look at the experience of the United Kingdom when this matter comes. Also, in some other countries, prosecutors' offices organize meetings with society in order to present the proceedings of, let's say, a certain case, what the punishment was for the offense, and so on. Thank you. Mr. Velička, we've heard representatives of the NGO. Now, what are your expectations? Well, when it comes to best practices, what are your expectations? What do you think it would be purposeful to implement? Well, we do look at the best practices. We do look at the program of the Organization for
Training Against Hate Crime for Law Enforcement.
That is a program called Training. So we do look at the international practices. They are not always transferred directly. We try to adapt it to the national context. We do look at the international case law, and well, we try to see the best examples there when it comes, let's say, to training. Ms. Greblikaitė, what are your expectations being the community officer? Well, we are always aiming at establishing the best possible connection with our community. I believe that training of officers will give very good results, and I think that in the future we will get rid of those prejudices that are inherent in some police officers. I think that there will no longer be any intolerance towards people who come from other countries. I hope that this will bring positive results. Thank you, Ms. Greblikaitė. And now I'd like, well, Mr. Šeinoka, you've already heard of certain things that are relevant to Lithuania, and you've heard about the expectations. Now, what advice would you give to Lithuania in implementing similar projects or initiatives in order to achieve effective results rather than just a tick in the paper?
Well, thanks very much. Well, first of all, it's not for me to advise, but it's a very. I found this a very interesting conversation. So it's a real privilege to listen to this. And I would like to reinforce firstly one of the points that Goda made about the practice in the United Kingdom. that she was told about by the representative of the Crown Prosecutor Service. And that's a practice that has just been introduced in Ireland. There are some changes in the Irish police at the moment that have just been introduced as part of the diversity strategy that I think speak directly to the conversation that we have just been having there. And I think it might be useful for the colleagues in the Lithuanian police to get in touch with the colleagues in the Irish police to talk about the changes that are, relatively speaking, low-cost changes, but very, very important and significant changes. And they include, well, training like the training that's already happening. But I suppose the key thing is that on the police incident recording system, when somebody reports a crime to the police, there is an immediate prompt now that the police officer must answer: is there a suspected hate element to this crime or not? And suspected. And again, and we have a definition of hate crime that says that if the victim or anyone else thinks that it is a hate crime, then the suspected element of a hate crime must be recorded. This doesn't tell you that it's definitely a hate crime, but it tells you that this possibility must be investigated. And then if you tick yes, then at every page on the report, there is a H to signify that there is a possible hate element, and that this follows the report through the system, so that the hate element is not lost as it is often. And I think just more broadly, having conversations like this about the needs, when we're developing a training program for the police in Ireland on how to meet the needs of Roma communities, Jewish communities, Muslim communities when they experience a hate crime. This necessarily brings you into a conversation about police attitudes and police culture, and opens the door into something deeper. And that's and I think so that's something. And I think that we got there, and that Einar is at the table in that conversation with the police, because we brought in the iReport system. So I would encourage my civil society colleagues in Lithuania to explore having a parallel system to the iReport system. And as I've said, we're in the process of making it easier to use and internationalize it. So our system is about to be replicated in Finland and in Croatia. And we will happily give you our template and help you set it up. But I would encourage you to have a strategy with as wide a cross-section of civil society as possible, buying into it and promoting it and pushing it. And I would also encourage the police to look on it favorably, to look on it as an opportunity to have critical friends engaging with them rather than as a threat, because that's where we have gotten to now with the police, and it's a much more productive relationship for everybody. So I would certainly encourage that.
Labai ačiū visiems diskusijos dalyviams, buvo tikrai įdomu ir išgirsti.
May I thank all the participants of the debate. It was very interesting to listen to all the ideas. I'm grateful to everyone who either participated as panelists or watched the discussion online. So the Human Rights Forum is still going on. But, well, as I have mentioned before this session, I said that there will be a question how to call an officer who forms a safe environment for other people and who promotes the population to become a police officer. Those who will answer the question correctly will receive prizes. And if you are willing to watch the whole of the forum, you will be able to watch it on